us, and my guest today is the one and only John Dacosta. I just looked over at the screen.
I try to look like I'm frozen for a quick second, so everyone's saying,
That is
Reds, the screen is
hilarious.
frozen. John is just stuck smiling. No, I'm not frozen.
Thanks for joining me today, John. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, man, anytime.
Cool. I'm looking forward to this conversation. And I tell you why in a lot of ways. Well, I got to do my housekeeping stuff first. I'm not
Okay.
really good at this broadcasting stuff, but I'm gonna try to somehow get this right. But basically, if you're joining us for the first time, go ahead and subscribe, like everything that we do. If it's of value, I mean, if it's not of value, can't force anybody to do anything. But if you find value in what we do, like it, share it. If you haven't already done so, head over to my website and register at jasonreynoldsproaudio.com, and also there you'll find a link to our Patreon site, patreon.com/slash Jason Reynolds Pro Audio. We're going to be doing a lot of live learning, master classes, and mentorship, of course, is a very big part of that. And who knows, if we get enough lighting people subscribing, we might need to bring in a lighting mentor. Like John was just telling me before we came live that he loves helping people. So, yeah, looking forward to today's conversation. If you have questions, I have the chat up on a screen over here to my right that you can't see, but I can see it. For those of you who are repeat viewers, you might see that we changed up the vibe of live Learn from the Pros a little bit, and our guest today is responsible for this change. He basically told me that he wasn't coming on the interview unless I fix up the lighting and the video, because he has a reputation of being like, this top-notch lighting and video director. So he's like, bro, you gotta fix this, because I can't come on the program with the thing look lame. So now we fixed it. We like, for those of you seeing it on YouTube, I learned how to put on titles and backgrounds and all these things. I'm becoming a broadcaster overnight. It's kind of crazy. But again, without further delay, I don't want to spend too much time talking about the hours and hours we spent trying to fix my lighting yesterday. And we're going to get into today. So, John, I want to tell the people a little bit about your background. I'm looking on your website here. The first
Oh
picture
my
that
God.
bro, the first picture that comes up is a show with a massive picture of Nelson Mandela, which is like crazy. But if I look through some of the stuff you've done, Redemption Live, um, Bob Marley Celebration Concert, Trey Songs Between the Sheets Tour, video director, Sir Arthur Guinness Day Celebration, production and lighting designer, Jamaica Jazz and Blues, production and lighting designer, Reggae Sumfest, lighting designer, Maxwell lighting design, like the Maxwell, right?
Well,
Not like
yeah,
John
yeah.
Maxwell, but that like
No, the Maxwell,
okay, all right.
yes.
I just making sure that the people
Very
understand
shy,
that Alicia Keys, video programmer and director. Um, I mean, we can go on and on. Verizon How Sweet the
Please
Sound
don't.
tour.
Don't go
I
on.
mean,
Don't go on.
no, we should tell the people that you've done a lot of things. Jeez. I mean, how long you been doing lighting for?
Oh my God. I always tell the story that I fell off the stage and fell into lighting kind of thing. I think my first official gig was February of 2006. That's kind of when that's when I kind of started working for Sean Paul. But I've been working in the business for quite some time before that.
Right.
Um, and a big part of the reason why I'm sitting in front of you is a lot of the people that I worked for. I think my first experience with lighting in the sense of like a player show was as a performer. I was actually a performer. I wanted to be a singer and a dancer, and I wanted to
Wow.
be the next Denzel Washington. And my mom was like, "You kind of have to have a backup plan, you know. You
Yeah.
can't just do that."
This is a
So when
boy that
I
not
was in high
really.
school, I was in a performing arts group, and uh, and we did that. And my mom said, "You have to do something else." So the trade off was for her was she said to me, "Well, don't be on stage all the time. Learn something else, so just in case." So during my CXC times, instead of performing, I did like two small roles, and I was working backstage between audio, lighting, I was in the fly loft helping people upset. I was doing costume changes with people and makeup and stuff. And that's kind of how I got the first taste of it. And then
Right.
that moved on into another group, and then it just kind of spiraled from there,
Right.
you
Right.
know.
So in did you have any sort of formal training in music?
No, I went eventually once I knew what I was going to do. I went to Nassau Community College and I have an associate degree in technical theatre, a
Okay.
little focus on lighting. So when I came back to Jamaica, I had this skill that I wanted to say, okay, now I have this skill, I need to find something to do. So I ended up working with a performing arts group called Ashe for a little while. And then that was kind of like the big trajectory. I was working as like the TD and I did audio and lighting and everything for the group. And then
Right.
we had a lady called Emma. Remember her last name? She came with the National Dance Theatre of London. She was there doing a short award theatre, and she came to help us organize our technical department. And
Right.
then we were talking, and she's like, "You look like you really like lighting." And I said, "I do." And she's like, "You're ready? You think you're ready to do it?" I was like, "Yeah." And she's like, "Okay, I'm going to introduce you to someone. Can you meet me at the National Arena Saturday at this time?" So I'm like, "Okay, cool." So I'm like excited. I go there,
Right.
meet her, and she goes, John, meet John Swaby. And I go, "Oh, hi, nice to meet you, John Swaby." And we and John Swaby started talking, and they were setting up for a show that day. It
Right.
was a Helen Baylor gospel concert.
Wow.
And me and him was talking, and he goes, "So you want to do lighting?" And I was like, "Yeah, I have a theater background, but I want
Mm.
to do a little more." And he's like, "Okay, you want to work?" And I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "You want to work now?" And I was like, "You mean like right now?" And he's like, "Yeah." And he was gonna walk me in and introduce me to the crew and goes, "Go." And I'm like, "All right." And I started jumping and hang lights and I'm running cables and stuff
Right.
and I'm learning the other side that I didn't know.
Right.
And then I ended up running the board for the show, like because it was like showtime and there was nobody there, and I'm like, "So is John coming back?" And guys like Dave is like, "No, you have to do it. Come in and know if you do it." And I'm like, "Okay." And I'm doing the show, and I'm my
Right.
first concert, and I'm just there, and at the end of the show, we're packing up, and John just appears like a ghost, and I'm like, "So did you see it?" He's like, "Yeah, I watched the show. You did a good job." And I was like literally just jump in first day, like
Wow.
just go at it kind of
Wow.
thing, and I just never looked back since then. So big shout out to John Sway
Yeah.
because
Huge.
that's the reason why I'm sitting in front of you now.
Funny enough, I don't know if you remember this, but we met a very long time ago when I just started to get into the industry because Philip Grant is my cousin.
Mm-hmm. I know Philip
So,
very well.
right. So back in those days when he was managing a lot of um, those concerts,
Mm-hmm.
I was actually working with him as a backline tech, setting up instruments and
Ooh.
stuff. So we had met like way back then. I mean, just like in passing, obviously, but
Was I mean to you?
no, 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 no.
Okay.
I don't think you have that reputation of being a mean individual. So I mean, I would have told you before I invited you on my broadcast that I'm gonna roast you because back then, no, no, definitely not. But it's funny you talk about John Swaby because John Swaby is really a pillar in the industry in Jamaica.
Unsung hero, like
Yeah,
literally
100%.
unsung hero.
They used
The
what they
amount
used
of
to say.
people
Them say they used to say what John Swaby could light you with the sun, um, pull power from the ground and make you stand on a leaf, right? Something like that. Did I
Yeah,
get it
yes,
correct?
yes, 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 yes. He's an unsung hero. It's hard to put into words, but it's one of those weird things. He has this characteristic of giving you information, but you even know that you got it.
Right,
He'd be
right,
teaching you, you don't even realize you're being taught.
a
And
hundred
that's
percent.
what I liked about him. Like he would make you become your own person and
Right.
guide you, and you don't even know you're being guided. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
We
yeah.
used to have conversation about gels a lot of time, and he just say, "Try it." And I tried it. But he's already planted a seed of what I should use already and stuff.
Right.
Amazing eye,
Mm-hmm.
amazing eye, and I think we cannot hail him up and big him
Yeah.
up on this platform.
And I mean to be very honest, to be, and one of the things we try to highlight in these learn from the pro sessions is the things that are similar across disciplines, right? That's one of the things I've tried to do from day one for people to realize that it doesn't matter if you're a lighting designer, video director, audio engineer. There's certain characteristics, there's certain intangibles that allow you to get to the top of the game.
Yep.
And one of those things is really being resilient. I think the mere fact that somebody like John Swaby has survived as an entrepreneur in a very tough industry in the world, much less in Jamaica, where we were having a discussion last night about how back when when I got into the industry, you were probably just quite a few years, but not very long before me. But when we got into the
Right.
industry, there was a whole lot of concerts happening in Jamaica. Like there
Yep.
was, I mean, I remember when I just started working with, and I call him Uncle Philip because he's older than me. But when we started working together, I mean, there was like a big show like every month, like at
Yep.
some points,
Yep.
right? Like between and that's outside of the regulars, the festivals, the Sumfest and Sting and Rebel Salute and all that stuff. Everybody wanted to come to Jamaica. Every artist. I taped a podcast for Full Bloom last night, and I was telling them my first concert I can remember going to was at Cinema 2 in New Kingston with
Mm-hmm.
Kirk Franklin and Crystal Lewis, and that was like after they had just released Lean on Me, which was a
Mm-hmm.
massive, massive worldwide hit for Kirk Franklin, and it was in Jamaica. Like everybody was coming to Jamaica at the time, and of course, John wasn't the only production company, but definitely was one of the most reliable and the best. Um, Talk a little bit about your. I don't know if your nickname is. I asked you yesterday, but you said it's a cool story behind it. So they used to. When I met you as Lil John,
Yes.
right? So I never knew your last name was Dacosta. In fact, long after somebody said we were having a conversation about lighting people, and somebody said, "Yeah, man, John Dacosta." I'm like, who? Who's that? I'm saying, "I don't know, man, Little John." I was like,
Yeah.
"Oh, yeah." So,
Yeah.
how did you get the nickname Little John?
Well, it came from one of the crew guys because when I started to work for John, we did, as I said, those Kirk Franklin and those gospel shows. We did so many of them. We did all of them. And it was just one of those passing things where one of the guys, crew guys, would say John, and the two of us kept turning around, and then he just said, "Listen, you're Little John, and he's John. All right, he's
Right.
Big John," and it just kind of stuck, and it became an industry thing. Like then people just call me, the crew call me Little John. It was just easier to refer to me as that.
Yeah.
And even now, still now, people still call me that name.
Right.
And
Right.
I don't mind it. It's pretty cool because it pays homage to John Swaby. And I'm
Yeah.
just to be even mentioned in that same conversation and to say that I could actually step in the footprints of John Swaby is a blessing. So
Right.
I
Right.
take it with grace that someone called me Little John. And I'm like, absolutely, I'll take it, you
Yeah,
know?
for sure. So maybe talk a little bit about like the early days. One of the things I try my best in these sessions with LDs because I'm not very versed in lighting. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, I've only began to become versed in lighting conversations in the past few years, having to production manage for Shaggy. So, being a production manager now, I have to advance the entire show, not just audio,
Right.
and have these conversations. So that's kind of been where I've developed some of my knowledge base surrounding lighting. But definitely back then, I wouldn't have known much about lighting other than the fact that I remember the first show I was on, and my dad said to me, "Well, there's different aspects of production, and you have to pick one. Like, if you want to go into production, you can't just be everything. Like, you should pick
Right.
audio or lighting." And I remember walking onto the first big stage with Uncle Philip and seeing a man climb up on the truss to go focus lights. And I was like, yeah, I not doing that.
They're not doing that.
so,
Yes. I'm going to pass on that
so,
one.
so
Yeah,
that's
understandable.
funnily, that's how I ended up getting into audio because I was like, yeah, that climbing thing, no. So back then in the early days, like one of the most interesting conversations I've had was with Neville Garrick about traveling with Bob Marley and lighting the show with light switches. Like, no, that's real early days. That's like a bunch of switches and some floodlight, and you never have things like barn doors and pan and tilt and like you know what I mean. So when you got into the industry, what was because fundamentals obviously are very important. What did a lighting rig look like back then, like a typical concert rig?
Well, to be honest, we have to be kind of like careful in that because the technology existed, it just didn't exist in Jamaica yet.
Right.
So there were moving lights, there were color scrollers, there were stuff like that. But
Mm-hmm.
because of just the economics, we couldn't do that. So when I
Right.
started, my first little touring show was with a little group around the Caribbean, and we got like six little, they looked like par 38s, this small, and there were house dimmer switches. It was just a house dimmer switch that you turn,
Right.
and we'd pack it into a little two rubber like crates,
Mm-hmm.
and we set up the show with two little stand, and I would just be turning, just turn knob all night, one seat,
Right.
next seat, you know. But the evolution of that, like when I started to work with Swaby, it was all about park cans, lots
Right.
and lots and lots of park cans. And my first introduction to a moving light was either between I think it was a cyber light at that time. So it was made by a high-end system, and it's literally as, I wouldn't say as tall as me, but massively tall with a
Right. Right.
long body. And the concept behind that, it used the mirror, so the light would
I
come up
remember that,
through the
man.
body of the light, and this mirror would move.
Yeah, I remember
And the
that.
typical show would be 60 or 80 park cans,
Jeez.
and
Right.
we only had 8 of them, 6 working at a time. But you put down a 2 there just to make
Right.
it look like it's working, but they're not working. You know
Right.
what I mean?
Right.
And it had a little Cyberlight controller, so there was 2 separate controllers. You had a regular little desk with
Right.
faders for the conventional, and then you had a little joystick driven Cyberlight controller, and that's kind of was my weapon of choice every day, and we just
Right.
pack
Right.
that up and move on. And we didn't have motors and stuff like that, so it was scaffolding. You'd build 4
Yeah.
scaffolding,
Yeah.
and then you'd rope up one side of the truss and rope up the next side, and we do that. Then you tie it off with some pipe, and
Right.
then lighting time, and you throw up a rope and you rope up the bar light and
Right.
you
Right.
rope up the
Right.
cable, and it was a process. You know what I mean?
Crazy.
But we did it, and we did it well
Yeah.
at the time, and I'm still surprised that we had no accidents. You know what I mean? We still did it safely, you
Yeah,
know.
'cause I mean,
But
I don't think like harness and them thing there was really a thing.
no, 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 no,
But
no. They had special people. There was a little
yeah,
guy who
yeah,
was
yeah,
small enough to get up the truss and walk through the truss. I mean,
yeah.
and I've done, like, I remember like yesterday we do, when it's time to gel, I'd sit down and lay out all the gels, and
Right.
then I'd literally have to pack them in order of how I was going to put it up.
Right.
So I'd pack them in a specific order, and he'd put it in a bag. He'd climb with that bag, and I'd put that paper at the front, so he knows that this is the first light.
Right.
And him go, okay, gel, 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 and I put a paper in between when there's supposed to be a space. So if you
Right.
have 2 blue, put in the 2 blue, then you have 2 red, blue. And if you see a piece of paper means the next two are nothing, and then
Right.
him keep going like that, and he gel the lights, and then check them, and him have to go up and focus the light them again, and I'm standing on stage kind of like pointing, okay, up some more, you know.
Crazy. Crazy.
But that was my introduction to it. So I didn't see really the technology until like we get into like the early Sumfest days and early when I started working on those shows. That's when I got a taste of what the technology looked like. I seeing the consoles and the moving lights and stuff. And lucky enough, I was just underneath it. I call it underneath the tree to catch everything. Like the
Right.
LDs were coming from the States, but because I spoke well,
Right.
I would be kind of like the go-to guy. So they say, hey, John, can you tell him to put that over there? I'm going to say, yo, move that and put it over there. So,
Right.
you know what I mean? So that was how I got to meet the LDs and talk to the LDs and stuff and be kind of like the translator. And then I get to see the technology. And I remember the first time I saw the Grand MA 1, like
Right.
mind blown. Like, I'm talking to the LD and I was like, this is great. I've never seen this before. And it was explained to me. And I said, can I have the manual? Because that's all I could have. And he's like, here's the manual. And I read that thing like there was no tomorrow.
Right.
So the next time they came back, I knew something. And I could say, hey, you know, they would be doing something. And I would stand up and I said, yeah, just hit clear 3 times. And they'd look at me like, oh, you know that? I was like, you gave me the manual already. You know what I mean?
Right. Right.
So
Right.
that was kind of the evolution of how I kind of like started from there to where I am now, just by learning, you know. And
Yeah.
I always preach this when I'm talking to younger people, is the two main things that I think made me successful is my attitude and my aptitude.
Right.
Now, in terms of the ratio of it is a little tricky, because I always say you need 90% attitude and only
Right.
10% of the aptitude.
Right. Gotcha.
And people are like, you really? And I was like, yeah, because a lot of times your attitude is what gets you hired. It's
Right.
how you talk to people,
Right.
how you troubleshoot when a problem is happened, how you
Facts.
deal
Yeah.
with those things. And people
Mm-hmm.
remember those things and go, yeah, you were very level-headed, you never panic and stuff. You're very polite, and they will remember that. And then once you have the aptitude to learn
Mm-hmm.
more every show and get better, because nobody knows 100%,
Mm-hmm.
you know. But if you can
Exactly.
learn 1% more this show and then 1% more the next show,
Yeah.
people are going to always hire you for those
Yeah.
things. So
Yeah. It's funny because when I was taping that podcast last night, the host asked me, how do I continue to stay grounded? And I told her, well, it's very simple because for me, my attitude is one of gratitude. And that
yep,
sounds cliche, but I'm so grateful to be where I'm at and to be doing the things I'm doing. Every time I sit in an airplane and I'm flying, or I sit in the airport before I board, it blows me away that I'm like, somebody's paying for me to go where and
yep,
to do what, like to do what I love. And when I see people who have to sit in traffic for hours to get to a job that they don't like, it makes me grateful. It makes me grateful that I'm able to do what I do. So
yep,
when you turn that attitude now into always wanting to learn, because trust me, I'm the first to tell you that I don't know everything. I have friends that are so super technical about things, all things audio. I just like it just blow my mind. Cause like even stuff like Dante, I have a friend Jamal who calls me all the time. He's like, man, I was doing this and I was trying this, and I'm like, just
I
tell
have
me how
no
it
idea what you're
works.
talking
Like
about.
when you figure it out,
You tell me.
just tell me how to use it, right? So I definitely agree with the fact that I'm a big believer in attitude being like one of those important things, and that's a huge gem for people that are watching, because your attitude definitely,
Yep,
there's a Bible verse or a scripture that say a gift will make room for you and bring you before great men. It's something that my mother used to always tell me, right? Is that your gift will make room for you. You don't have to go out and fight for what is yours. What is yours will be for you, and
yep.
you just have to maintain that level headedness to know that keep a good attitude and keep, yeah, that's huge. Did you ever encounter any issues in the early days, like with LDs coming in from abroad when you weren't necessarily LDing the show, but you had to be more in a support capacity? Like, did you encounter any people who were negative or just jerks?
Um, kind of yes and no. I think I was blessed that um those situations, whenever they came up, I tried my best to diffuse it early and diffuse them early. In other
Right,
words, a big thing that I try and do is manage their expectations. So if I'm a lot of times on those shows, I would try and be that guy. Like when I became the LD for those shows and I had a guest LD, the first thing I did was call before they
right,
got there and I was like, hey, it's not Mexico, it's not South America.
right,
We speak English and we understand those things. Here's what we have.
right,
This is what we have, and we're going to do the best that we can. And once you get to them before they land, I found that is always great. Like, my biggest fear that I had was I was doing jazz and Celine was the headliner, Celine Dion.
right,
And I got all the paperwork and I'm designing it and I'm like, and they sent me their plot and I looked at it and I was like, there's no way we could do it. It's absolutely impossible.
right,
Budget wise, we cannot replicate this.
right, right,
But as an LD, you kind of look at you kind of look at the plot and say, okay, what do they really need? And I was like, okay, fine. So I just called the guy. I called him and I was like, hey, very heavy French accent. And I explained to him. And it was the most pleasant conversation I ever had. And he was so happy that I called because he was like, I'm happy that you called because now I know what I'm going to get. And I was like, hey, tell me what you really need, because it's a festival. And that's when I realized that he only needs 30% of what was there. He's like, yeah,
Right.
man, I don't need those. I need these things on the floor. I need that, I need that, and I need that. And once you get past that, and he landed, it was the greatest experience ever. So
Right.
my attitude has always been to manage the expectation before they leave, because they're going to have a notion,
Right.
or they're
Right.
going to call a friend and say, yeah, you ever work at Jamaica? And them say, yeah, man, I work at Jamaica. It's horrible, blah, blah, blah. And they feel, and then come with this attitude. But if you can diffuse it before they even get on the plane, so I always just try before. And
Mm-hmm.
then when they get there, there are occasionally one or two that I've had a couple where I said it to them and I explained to them, guys, this festival is a Jamaican festival. You know what that means? It's going to end at 9 o'clock in the morning. The show is going to run all night till in the morning. I
Right.
cannot give you a programming slot after the show.
Right.
But we need one. I said, I cannot give you a programming
It's
slot. The
just
most I can
physically
do,
impossible.
you can get a day slot, and I can give you doors. I can give you early doors, because people come here late to the show, so you can get the first couple hours. And them insisted, and I'm like, okay, no problem. And I turn up, and we'll fold our hands. In the middle of the day, they're trying to program, and I'm like, I know this would happen.
Right.
But
Right.
you do your best, because
Right.
again, you're a facilitator. You don't want to be, I always want one thing. I want to change the notion of how they feel about Jamaica. I want them to come and say, I thought this, but when I left, I felt this. I want them to feel, and
Right.
I make sure I run a good crew, so they walk away with a good experience, so I can change that notion that, hey, we had a good time in Jamaica.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we had a couple problems, but they fixed them, kind of
Right.
thing.
Right. I just want to remind everybody that's watching, don't miss this opportunity to ask questions, because if you guys send me a DM like afterwards, right? Make sure if you have questions, you drop it in the comments. I am paying attention. I don't know if any of my moderators are here today. Hard to get good help. No, I'm kidding. They're great, but yeah. If you have questions, please feel free to drop them in the comments. So hi, there's one thing you touched on, and that the Jamaican festival scene, for people who don't understand, because I have people who watching who aren't Jamaican, but let's say a festival like Sumfest, which is a multi-day festival, which, like you says, runs all night and ends at like 9 o'clock in the morning. How difficult
Mm-hmm.
is it to like turn a new look for that night? I guess now that it's are you lighting the whole thing nowadays, being that it's an all Jamaican festival? But if you can think back a little bit, to part B of that question would be when you had other lighting designers who needed that time to get a different look every day with sort of the same rig. What's your approach to something like that with not much programming time?
I mean, back then, because the technology of 3D visualization was still early. Which what we tried to do was give them at doors, like literally, they can work offline as best as they can, and at doors, because we know our crowd won't get there late. I don't
Right,
see nobody
right,
before 10 o'clock. You know what I mean?
right,
So they
right,
have a couple hours, and I would just share that up even with things. Even when Nesta came with Damien, it's the
right,
same thing. Luckily, we had 3D, so he was at front of house. He had a 3D visualizer and could see what he was doing. And then I gave him doors to kind of
right,
fine tune it, because 3D is never going to be perfect. It's going to be close.
right,
So that's kind
right,
of the approach we've always done. Now, when there's no other art, no other LD coming yet, it is an all night thing. Luckily, I've trying to have a couple of youngins in training, you know what I mean? So they get a chance to touch a console on a couple of the acts that will kind of help. And if I need to go pee, or if I need to go to the video truck to go check on something,
right.
you know. And even last year I had Bobby Basco, my business partner, so we kind of tag team it
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing. But yeah, it's just a brutal long night, you know.
Yeah.
It's the good thing is that the music is so dancehall, especially like on dancehall night, is such an interesting thing that is more energy than anything else. Is how to build that energy, how to take that when the artists get on stage, how to build the energy of that act, and
Right,
that it
right,
builds during the night, so when you get into like the heavier acts, the massacre and them big act there,
right,
there's an energy in the crowd already. So you really don't have to do nothing much to embellish it because them already have them light on the torch, them a blow on the horn, and because there's a build of energy. So all I'm doing is taking that energy and say, how do I just step it up a little? How do I just lift that a
Right.
little? And
Right.
that's the thing with dancehall, because it doesn't need. It's a little less of. It's not like R&B that needs a color and a feel and a look. It's
Right.
all about energy. It's all about it's like this.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
like and it's like it's
Especially when
literally like
Rough
that
Cut
the
is
whole
playing and
time.
the drummer is like at 120 BPM
That's
all
it.
the
That's
time.
literally it. You know what I mean? And the only thing I wait for is my friends always tease me because I wait for the instructions and I'm saying, like, man, turn off the lights. And I was like, okay,
Perfect.
I'm just sit there. All right, tell me
I
when to
got
turn it back
this.
on.
I
All
can
right, turn
I
it back
can
on
nail a
now.
blackout.
Yeah, you know what I mean? But yeah, so it's a little less, it's a little more organic for us in that kind of, in our music form where it's just
Right.
about energy and raw vibe.
Right.
And then you get a one or two acts that like a Spice or something like that that has more of a, she have a more of a longer set and with a more storyline that you can actually help. Where she come on last year, she came on with some things and there are guys carrying her on her shoulder and she
Yeah, she
sit down
always
and dances. So there's a
yeah.
little more you can do. But then
Right.
when you get into like the bounty kill and stuff, it's just energy.
Yeah,
Just
yeah,
embellish the energy, just
yeah.
try and drive, get the crowd hype with them when
Right.
they're hype kind of
Right. I've you mentioned Bounty Killer. It's actually funny. I was on the Jamrock cruise in 2018 with the Marley Brothers, right? And so that night the lineup was, it was Jesse Royal, I think. Yeah, Jesse Royal, then Marley Brothers, then Jacure, and then Bounty, right? Because Ziggy not really a fan of cruising. So this was when the ship docked in Ocherius. We got on, played, the brothers got off the ship, and then the rest of us got off in Falmouth the next day, right? So the Ziggy and the brothers, well, except for Damien, obviously, because it's his crew, the rest of the brothers got off before the ship even moved from dock, right? So I
right.
remember after the show, somebody came up to me and said, Reds, because normally Bounty just use the in-house text, right? And somebody
Mm-hmm.
came over to me and said, Bounty, you want the monitors for Bounty? I was like, no, 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 sir.
Yo,
Because,
fix this, fix this.
listen, cussing engineer is now officially a part of Bounty Killer's set. Like, he's a part of the set. I was like, yeah, I good. I
Yeah,
am
but
good.
it's funny if you look on the outside, you're like, why is this man angry? But if you really think about it, it's a part of the set.
Yeah,
It builds the energy of the audience. It
yeah,
builds the
it,
anticipation of the audience that
it
this
really
is
is.
thing needs to fix because the man name is Bounty Killer.
Exactly. I mean,
He's not a peace warrior. No.
right? Yeah, he's not Bounty pacifier for sure.
No, he's not.
How difficult was the transition from that kind of um dancehall energy where you're not necessarily thinking about smooth creating, well, you are creating emotion and energy but in a different way, to transition into something like an R&B, which is a much more controlled show. Obviously your color schemes would be very different. How difficult did you find that transition, if at all? Were you kind of just born to do that?
Well, I wouldn't say born to do that. I think the my background in theater kind of helped me because I had this heavy background in theater and music and musicals, and then dancehall and reggae was the other side of that. But when I made the transition, it wasn't that hard because the principles are the same. And I
Right.
always teach it. Always teach it to anyone that I'm talking to. It's considered. I call it AIDS.
Mm-hmm.
Never mind. Um, you need to create the A atmosphere.
Right.
What atmosphere it is? Is it moody? Is it Is it a jazz room? Is it dark at night? What atmosphere? Then the eyes for illumination. We have to see the money. We have to see the person that's singing.
Right. Right.
Then the next thing would be D, which would be the dimension. You have to create. It has to look like a 3D space. So how do you carve the artist out from the background? How do you make
Wow.
the musicians carve them off the background?
Wow.
And then, of course, my favorite thing, which is the S is for style, is you have to put your own style to it.
Right.
My wife was teasing me last night. We were talking about something, and she's like, I can look at any show and I can tell you do it based on your color schemes, based on the palette that you use, based on the type of colors that you use.
Right,
And I
right,
think everyone will eventually kind of develop their own style and their own feel. And a couple of my friends said the same thing. They got to jazz and they go, "Yep, there's that John Blue.
right,
Yep, I
right.
know that color," kind of thing. So the
Yeah,
transition wasn't bad because the elements are the same. One, the fundamentals are the same.
right,
What was different was now the storytelling that had to happen
right,
versus dancehall. There was no need for that. Now I had to sit down and figure out, here's this show that has to thread at this storyline.
mm-hmm.
Especially my time with Maxwell. It was always about how you make this, how do you just take that milky sound music, how you embellish that. And sometimes a couple of the songs, there was nothing for me to do.
Right,
It's
right.
like literally just give him a light
There's
and give him
one
the mic.
light. Yeah,
And
yeah,
that's it. You know what I mean? So there's no. So
yeah.
I was lucky enough to have those kind of experiences,
Right,
or the flip of that, like when I did Maroon 5 a year ago,
right.
and it's a totally different energy. It's like it's so in your face, and we were doing massive stadiums.
Yeah,
You know
yeah.
what I mean? So the scale of it was the biggest I've ever seen. Like I'm
Right.
just used to it being in a little arena like MSG or one of those, but no, we're in someplace in China in the
Hold
Olympic
on, hold
Stadium.
on, hold on. Stick a
You
pin.
know,
Stick a holy pin.
big pin.
Anybody ever hear anybody hear what John just say? I'm used to doing a little arena, Madison Square Gardens. Then I just want to make sure. I just making
Hide
sure
in case shots fired. Shots
just
fired.
making
Hide, John. Hide.
sure that y'all heard that, right?
Hey, listen.
I
I
am
am.
just used to little arenas like the
I
biggest
will. I will
in
be
North
proud to say
America.
that I am proud to say that this little kid grew up on the streets of Arnett Gardens,
Brother.
where all I saw was
Yeah,
poverty
yeah,
and people killing people.
yeah.
And my mother, who is alive now, and every time I go to Jamaica, I go on the same veranda and sit on that
Mm-hmm.
veranda.
Mm-hmm.
And I go to my old primary school, Johnstone Primary, and I go sit down and
Mm-hmm.
remind myself that this is what I worked hard
Yeah,
for. I worked
yeah,
hard to
yeah,
leave, to take that in my rear view mirror, but
yeah,
remember it and go as far as I can
yeah.
possibly go. And
And
my mom, she said to me, she's not as current, but she said it to me every time I'd come home from school. She'd lock that grill and I can't go on the other side. I'd stay
mm-hmm.
inside
Mm-hmm.
every day. And when she'd reading her newspaper and I'd go sit with her, she's like, "Remember, this is not your reality.
Wow. Powerful.
This is my reality.
Mm-hmm.
So look beyond the grill, look beyond Slipe Road, look beyond Penn Street, look
Mm-hmm.
beyond Port Royal, look beyond Norman Mann International Airport, look beyond the shores
Yeah,
of Jamaica."
yeah, yeah.
And that's what she said to me every day.
It's
So
huge.
I feel proud that I can, sit here
Yeah, yeah.
and
And
say those things
and
that
to be
it's a
honest,
small arena.
I said that to poke fun, but I am one of the I if anybody talks to me any length of time, right? Um, I am very very proud of my fellow Jamaicans who accomplish great things. One of the things I talked about on the podcast I taped last night with and this person just hit me up on Instagram. They have a podcast to say, hey, we like what you're doing. We'd love to chat. Um, as a Jamaican, I didn't really understand. I mean, I knew that our country had impact, but I didn't really understand the level of that impact until I started touring with Shaggy and he took me around the world. Like when you go to places that you would never think, like Czech Republic and these
Yep.
places where a lot of times people don't even speak English and people singing word for word and we're talking like masses of people. Um, I am very proud of my fellow Jamaicans who climbed that ladder because to be very honest, when I moved to Canada, I fought a lot of years against the stigma of, oh, you're from Jamaica, you don't really know about line array and how to fly PA and how to tune
Mm-hmm.
PA. And in fact, an owner of a production company sent a guy on a gig, paid him a day rate, just
Right.
to babysit me. right?
Because yeah.
Because Jamaica, you can't possibly know about anything. You come from a third world country, right? So,
Mhm.
so I like to highlight the fact, and shout out to Bobby Bascom as well,
Yep.
who is working with some of the biggest artists on the planet as well. Both of you guys are doing it huge. So, you know what I mean. And even when it comes to like audio engineers, people might watch these broadcasts and say, "Oh, how come you're always bringing on Jamaican people?" Because I want you guys to watch this and see that even this tiny dot
Yep.
on the world map, we have people who out there doing it for the best of them, right? The best of them. So, no, I'm incredibly proud of what you've accomplished as well. So I want to jump in and take a few questions because I think right here would be a good point to interject, right? So Bo asks, "What's your go-to lighting console and why?" And I know what the answer to that question is, but you can go ahead and answer.
Yeah, primary lighting console of the Grand MA2, and then I'm gonna eventually learn the three. I'm not learning it yet.
Right,
Um, and the reason why is because that's what I needed to know to get these jobs. I couldn't. I mean, I didn't want a situation where someone called me and said, "Hey, you know the MA2," and I said no, and they're like, "Okay, well, I can't hire you." So it
yeah,
was kind of like
yeah.
you needed to know that. So,
Hmm.
um, but
And
yeah, that's pretty much.
talk a little
I
bit
do
about.
can
Okay, sorry.
I can if I had to. I can actually if I had to. You know, the good thing is that the promo, aside from the syntax being slightly different, you can really jump around. So I know a little Avo, I know a little Hog, I know a little Chamsis if I had to,
Right,
but I don't need
right,
to learn anymore. So I just learn enough to be dangerous if
right,
I'm in a situation where someone's programming for me because they do have my desk. I can at least tell
right,
them in a way that they understand. But MA2 all
right,
the way.
right. And
Shout out to
and
MA Lighting.
yeah, shout out MA Lighting. And if you and obviously you do quite a fair bit of running video or queuing video or controlling a media server from the MA as well.
Yes, that's kind of how I kind of ended up getting a lot of these bigger name jobs because I can do both.
Right,
I got introduced to video early when at jazz and those festivals, so I already knew it, so it was easy to do the transition. But a lot of these jobs that I get is because they want one person to manage both kind of thing. So, and I do a lot of just video only programming
mm-hmm.
also. And I found that if you do both, it makes you a little more marketable because then you can sell yourself as, hey, you're saving another guy, another hotel room, another
Right,
airline ticket kind of thing. So,
right,
but yeah, it's a little tricky sometimes because with the technology, there's so many different media servers out there.
mm-hmm.
So I try to stick to what I've always been that kind of guy where I just stick to what I know
Right,
and I learn what I need to know.
right. And
It just that's how I can operate it.
what's your media server of choice?
Of choices, PRG has a thing called Mbox,
Okay,
and I use that a lot on my shows.
okay,
And I know enough D3 to be bad, to
right,
be
right.
So if I had to,
Mm-hmm.
I can find my way around on a D3.
No Resolume.
But I can be dangerous. I don't see that a lot because of the kind of shows that I do. It's
Right,
pretty much either Mbox or D3. When I did Maroon 5, it was D3.
right,
Even the little Jojo Siwa thing for Nickelodeon that I'm doing now
right,
is Mbox, you know.
right,
And the good thing is that a lot of times, if you get in early with the production, you can dictate what it is.
right,
Because a lot of
right.
times people are a production manager saying, I want a D3. And I'm like, do you know what the D3 can do? No, because everybody has it. I was like, no, what do you want to do? Oh, you just want to play video. Okay, anything else? Okay, so there's several servers that do that well, kind of thing.
Right, right, right,
So sometimes I get to dictate what servers I use, which is great.
right. And the key thing here is for people to understand that it's just a tool. Like, I mean,
Yep.
as long as you have a mastery of the fundamentals, then the tool becomes a little less relevant. but what the tool really is just what you find the easiest to get the job done. So if you know, like for example, I tell people all the time, I'm sitting in front of a digital console. um I would be lying if I tell you that I've chosen digital because it is by far the best sounding desk on the market. That's ridiculous. I mean, in fact,
Right.
after you get to a certain point, everything sounds great. It is 100% to
Mm-hmm.
do with other factors that make me comfortable. So workflow, I like the workflow. I can run a digital with my eyes closed. I don't have to think about it. I the
Right.
reliability makes me comfortable. I've never had a digital crash on me on in a show-stopping way. So that makes me comfortable. So, but at the end of the day, if you put me behind I like how you respond. If you put me behind a Avid S6L, I can be dangerous. If you put me behind
Yeah,
a
I can make
Midas
it
Pro
work if you
2,
have to. Yep.
I can be dangerous. As long as, and I used to have to do that because in the early days of touring with Shaggy, we never spec consoles. Like our tour manager was he advanced all the shows. So he was just like, yo, this show
Mm-hmm.
you have a Yamaha CL5. And I'm like, but I don't know that console. So when I would walk in and just say to the host tech, all right, how I access the EQ, how I get my filter, how I get to the
Yep.
compressor and the gate, boom, that's all I need for now. We're good. We have a show.
And you see that three more times, and then you start learning it because you see it
Exactly.
three more times on the tour. Yeah.
Exactly. There's another question here that I think is very important because a lot of people who don't necessarily have experience of touring with like an A-level act that carries a rig that has rehearsal time,
Mm-hmm.
etc., might not be as familiar with this process. So Nadia asks, can you tell us about preparations for a tour with an international artist, like rehearsal process, etc.? Like what goes into from concept, because you do a lot of design as well, right? So
Chris.
from being approached with nothing and through the design process all the way up to implementation, rehearsal and implementation. Can you tell us a little bit about what that process looks like?
All right. I'm going to talk about the opposite of that, which is a lot of the tours, the bigger name tours that I do, let's say a Maroon 5 or a
Hmm.
Demi Lovato or something like that.
Right.
They've hired a designer already and they've hired a creative team,
Okay.
right? The designer reaches out to me and say, "Hey John, what's your schedule like? Are you available? I have a tour coming up. I'd love for you to be the lighting director."
Hmm.
And I was like, "Oh, sure, send me the dates." He sends me the dates. And I was like, "Who's programming it?" And he'll go, "Okay, I'm getting Mark Butts to program lighting. Do you want program video? Sure." And then he starts sends me a couple of drawings. Here's a draft version 1 with renders of what the thing will look like. Familiarize yourself with it, kind of thing.
Right. So hold
Once
on.
we get
So
closer to the time,
before we move to the next aspect, so in a high level situation like that, at a A level artist, there's somebody who designs who is sometimes different from
yeah,
somebody the person who programs, who is different
yeah,
from you who is going out on the road as the LD.
correct.
Okay.
Yes, there's different tiers. So sometimes um if the designer is also, he could just be lighting designer, but then there's also a creative director.
Right.
So between the two of them, they work out the concept and stuff, and they're meeting with the artists and going over the details and stuff.
Right.
Then the lighting designer will hire a programmer based on, typically it's based on the workflow of the designer. Some designers are kind of more loose. They'll just give them the music and let the programmer kind of run with it.
Right.
Or in some cases, I've had a guy who just sent us a lookbook for every song. Like, this is what it should look like. These are the color schemes. Stay inside of this palette, kind of thing. So yeah, and then once we're all hired, we kind of all talk to each other. I know the programmer knows me. Me and him start to talk about workflow because he's going to hand the show over to me.
Right.
So we discussed that kind of workflow with, okay, how you like, do you like this way? No, do you want to send me a profile? And we talk that through.
Makes
Once we
sense.
get past that and we're in the early rehearsal phases, they'll like band rehearsals and stuff will be all separate and stuff. And then once we move past those rehearsals, we'll go straight into what we call a production rehearsal.
Hmm.
Production rehearsal is now that's when they're going to load everything into like a Sony or a big studio space. When we did Demi Lovato, they loaded into this old arena somewhere. So, and then once that is loaded in now, rehearsals tend to happen in the day and programming happens in the night. So the band or artist will rehearse. let's say up to like 8, and then we go into programming mode between like 10 all the way till 10 the next morning. So we'll program all night, and we'll do that for several days. Some designers will record like a videotape it so we
Mm-hmm.
can take a look, and then we won't do a show until 3-4 days in when we have enough material to show, and then
Right.
we'll do a show and tell. So we'll do a run of the show with either when we did John Legend, we had a stand-in. So the choreographer was a stand-in, and John would sit and watch it.
Right. Right.
Notes on, okay, I like this, I like that.
Right.
I'm not sure if I like that kind of thing.
Right.
And then at some point during that process, when we're doing those runs, we'll do what we call a handover. So he'll hand the show over to me, and I'll run the show for those rehearsals. So by the time we get into the first show, I would have run it 2 or 3 times already. The programmer stays on for little fixes, because what that does, it spreads the workload around, which means I get to rest. I come back with a fresh set of eyes to run the show. Programmer, he's tired. He gets, you know what I mean?
Right.
So it's easier way to spread the workload around.
Right.
So when we get into like show mode, program all night, I can come in fresh in the day and run it till as this, and then we'll do a gradual. Typically, the programmer might stay an extra day, and then it's all mine. And then all the fixes and stuff that happen on the road are all I'll take care of those. So if the artists want to cut a song, if they want to change a verse, then I do all of those fixes. And then once the tour is finished and we're going to what we call like the festival season, then I take that show file and then modify it for festivals and one-offs and all those other things. So typically that's kind of how the process works.
And so how I would imagine that these programmers or designers, it's is it a lot of the times a collaborative effort, so they will take input from you, or is it kind of you have some guys who are just like, no, this is all I wanted, this is all I like it, and that's it?
It depends. As I say, it's more a relationship with the designer. Like I work closely with a guy called Jonathan Gostein. We do a lot of things together, and it's our relationship at that point where you can say, we had that kind of relation where I can say, hey, John, I'm not sure if this is going to work. And he'll say, why? And if there's a reason is valid, then we'll take a look at like an option B or option C. But yeah, so a lot of it is definitely collaborative, you know. But literally the challenge is that once it's out the gate, it's yours. You'll never see the designer again. So any changes or stuff, it's really your baby at that point. So if you get called into the dressing room one night and say, hey, you know, I love this is a good story segue. So I did P. Diddy when it was, what's the name of the group? I don't remember. It was him and the 2 girls. And we did a tour, and I had busted my finger in the door somewhere in some case, and I was wearing this bandage, and I missed a cue one night. Like I triggered the cue late. And the manager came to me and said, Diddy wants to see you in the dressing room. And I was like, oh God. Never been fired, but it might be tonight. So I go to the dressing room now, and I bust the dressing room door. And the door, it's just, this first area is just full of models and stars and stuff and things. And we kind of scoot through this into like the rear bathroom, and Diddy's in there changing, and he come in and close the door, and Diddy's there changing, and I'm like, okay, do we have to do this now? And he's like, John, man, you missed that cue. I was like, I know. And I said, like, you see my finger? It's busted, like, you know. I mean, every time I press, it hurts, you know. Left hand not so good, right hand. It's like, man, John, we gotta get those cues. It's like, you're the 4th member of the band. And I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, like it's like
the 4th member of the band.
The weight of that is insane. Yeah.
You know? But yeah, and he was right, because the show was such a visual show. There were all these moving parts and things that move and stuff. So, but yeah, so once the designer hands it over, it's really your baby for the rest of the run, or forever most time. Because then in the end, you might get the opportunity to design the next tour. You know what I mean? If they don't go back to the designer, because you're officially working for the band for the rest of the time.
Right, right.
Hope that
Now,
answers the question.
do you in terms of, because you've obviously worked with a broad spectrum of artists, all top artists. Who stands out in your mind as an artist who's really involved in that creative process? Because you tell that story about Diddy is really cool. Because I don't, for those of us who obviously have never met these artists, like Diddy wouldn't strike me as the kind of guy who would be like notice one miscue, right? So I find that kind
He
of
did.
interesting. But who kind of stands out in your mind as an artist that, in a good way, that is super involved and notices what you do? Because sometimes that can be very hard. I think for, like, if as an audio guy, especially a monitor engineer,
Hmm.
if you do a bad job, the artist notice
Oh yeah,
first,
yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And I've worked with a lot of artists that don't necessarily notice lighting, like just from an observation standpoint. So, like we talked on the live the other day about sort of gratification, and sometimes that's why I enjoy monitors, because the gratification is instant. The artist come off the stage and say, "Yeah, it was good tonight," right? Boom, thanks. Front house engineer doesn't necessarily get that because the artist not here in front house, and sometimes the artists don't necessarily notice lighting unless, like you said, there's a miscue. But who kind of stands out in your mind as one of those artists that really pays attention and notices the good stuff?
Um, it's a trick one because I think I did a few years with Maxwell, and I had a good I no, I shouldn't say had, I still have a good relationship with Maxwell the artist, as in, you know, and yeah, he was very particular about how things would look. He'd come at front of house and kind of look at things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and he was very, like, the picture, that the Mandela picture was his idea. He would say,
Right.
he'd like WhatsApp me, John. We were touring at the time when Mandela died, and we're playing in South Africa, and
Mm-hmm.
he WhatsApp me. He's like, John, we have to do a tribute. We have to put together a tribute for the show tomorrow. We need to find some pictures, and which song? Can you tell me which song we want to do it in? And it was a collaborative thing. Like, okay, which song?
That's
Okay, we
dope.
need to find the right song to put it in and the right moment.
Yeah.
You know, where are you going to put the image? Is it going to be center to the right? Should I turn? Should I kneel? And it became a collaborative thing. And I did like that. That was the most collaboration I've ever had with an artist like him. He was very into that, and he was the one of the like he'd send me messages to say, where are the pictures? And I said, Max, what do you mean? He's like, did you take any pictures? Like, no, I couldn't because I'm doing the show. He's
I'm
like,
like doing
so there are no
lighting, bro.
pictures? And I'm like, but Max, I can't take pictures. And he's like, because he wanted to see what it looks like or what
Right.
so every now and then I'd take a camera and take pictures and send to him. Or he'd send me some pictures of front that he found on Instagram. He'd be like,
Right.
check this out. I like this one. Can we keep this look? Or, okay, why is this so dark? Kind of thing.
Right.
And he
Right.
kind of had to explain to him. So that, I think, he was the one I had I would say, one of the best relationships with. It was
Nice.
very collaborative. He was always asking and always wanting, and he knew his marks, which is
Right.
always rare to have an artist that knew. He knows for women's work, he has to find center. He
Right.
know no matter where he ends up, he
Right.
knows that song going to start. He's going to drag that mic stand to center and put it center because he knows
Right.
that light going to come. You know
Right.
what I mean? So
Yeah.
that was a really good experience.
Yeah, funny enough, I think so. It's crazy because even with Shaggy, like in the early days of when I was working with Shaggy, lighting wasn't really as much of and I started working with him shortly after Bobby. And I think
Right.
after Bobby moved on, it was just kind of not a focus until now the video and the media portion of the show became important. And after he went and did stuff with Disney, right? Like when he did the Little
Mhm.
Mermaid stuff, because I called him after the Little Mermaid thing. I said, man, it looked like in the first song, Under the Sea, you never look like yourself. You never look as because he had so many cues of you have to be here at this time. You have to look into this camera. The light is going
Yep.
right. But then by the time he got to the second song, Kiss the Girl, it was him. Like I was like, dude, you nailed that. That was
Mhm.
amazing. And he was saying, and I think after that experience, now he's very big on like hit cues and marks and stuff, and we just did a tour of the UK. So that I would imagine that you know those artists that have more of that experience of working with a consistent rig, because that a
Yeah.
lot of the times is really the challenge in reggae, is that we're doing, so it's a festival landscape, like we're not really touring with a rig and stuff being the same, so it's kind of hard sometimes to maintain a certain, up to a point, a certain level of consistency. But I find that very interesting that you know, you have artist with everything that's going on in an artist's brain while they're performing, that he would be so good at nailing marks and cues.
Yeah, and I think it's also muscle memory for him. He knew
Right,
that every time he performs that song, that's this light would come up. But
right,
that you made a good point about the disparity between like what you know or this side of the world does versus reggae. And I think the biggest good point about the festival thing, but the other thing also is that a lot of the shows that I do and arts that I do, putting together a show, a specific show
right,
that doesn't change. It's
right,
the same show every night. You know what I mean?
right,
So when I did Demi Lovato, we had 3 lifts plus a B stage.
right,
So we had a little counter in our room, so she knows how much time she needs to change and what time she needs to get out to get to that lift. And
right,
there's 2 stage managers there waiting for her to prepare the lift, safety up on the lift, down the
right,
lift, come around,
right,
go back to get to the sofa, sit up on the lift. You know what I mean?
right,
So it
right.
becomes muscle memory and it becomes a show versus um our music, reggae and dancehall. They don't look at it that day. They don't look at it as a creative story, as a show. It's just
Right. We're gonna
what we're gonna
play.
do tonight.
We're gonna play
Right,
some
right, right,
tune.
right, right, right. Okay,
We're
good.
gonna
Let's do
play
that.
some hit tune.
Yeah, play
Right.
some hit tune. No, you can't start with a tune there, kind of, or you do the research. I remember when I was with Sean Paul, they do the research of what was a hot song in that city
Oh,
that
that
night.
Shaggy's
So they
notorious
would,
for that.
so they would drop that in,
Notorious.
and then Sean would do the jersey, the football jersey of that team.
Right.
So when he
Right.
do the encore, he'd come on in the jersey, or they'd come on with a flag, and you know what
Right.
I mean.
Right.
So that was the only thing that was consistent. Outside of that, it was just tune, 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 tune,
Right.
tune.
Right.
You know what I
Right.
mean? There was no. So that's the thing I'd love to change at some point. That if I could get into like the proteges and the chronics to say, hey guys, I know it's about the musical thread, but it needs to be also be a visual thread too. How do we visually make this show
Yeah.
different? It's not just
Yeah.
run on, tune and kick and da da da, but it might be a moment where you go off and the band plays something and come back, things like
Right.
that to
Yeah.
make the show
Yeah.
different. But
And creating dynamics within the show. I think
mm-hmm.
sometimes reggae artists, dancehall artists especially, like we're so dependent on energy that energy is often interpreted as the crowd screaming and jumping up and yelling, when
Yep.
there
Mm-hmm.
is a energy in a slower song, there's an energy
Yep.
in a, like for example on this last UK tour, big up J Will, because he did a lot of other content for Shaggy for the last UK tour, and like he would and again, it's just like the evolution, I think, of Shaggy even as an artist and how he approaches it. A lot of that has to do with even working with Sting. A lot of his process, not everything he takes, because obviously it's not everything that's going to work for him,
Right.
but having that sort of experience and growth is evident, because like he would finish a song and he knew Strength of a Woman was coming up, so he would walk back and sit on the edge of the riser, and then
Right.
he would start Strength of a Woman, and then the visuals would be um, different women, like famous strong women, Mother Teresa and a
Mm-hmm.
whole bunch of different people in the visual. And every night that song, even though it's not as energetic as, let's say, Church Heathen or something like that, right,
Right.
would have a certain energy because it's telling a story. And that, I think, is the most powerful part of what you get to do, because we don't necessarily get to do that in audio. Like it
No.
we
Right.
don't
That is true.
have the ability to create those kind of palettes, and not just creating a palette, but affecting emotion, because what people see affects their emotions way more than what they hear, right?
Mm-hmm.
So and it's just a reality of how we are designed as human beings. So I think that kind of working together, it's I always find it a very interesting thing, because is, yeah, it's cool what and I think I'm looking at the comments. I think it's little bit more, Ryan, than just production value. I think it's really storytelling
Yeah,
in its
it
highest
is.
form, right?
And there's a part of it also that we have to look at that. The example that you use where Shaggy sits on the riser on the video, it's almost like it's a collaborative thing where my job is to help the music.
Right,
And if I can help it with video and I can help it with lighting, then the demand on the artist is a little less. So
right,
Shaggy can breathe at that point
right,
because we could vamp out the first part of the song, the video comes up, and he can rest. And there's an energy because people are now focusing on the screen. They don't see where he is because they're looking at the screen. He
right,
can move his position to a different place. So light comes up on him and he can start singing. So things like that is a tool to say, okay, how do I always use it as like brackets, like this song end brackets. Okay, let's bring the audience back down. Let's point their direction to let them look at something else. You can go have some water, come back, rest, ready to move on to the next song.
right,
And that is what we don't look at when we're producing these reggae and dancehall shows. It's just really tune, 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 because their measuring factor is not the creative side. It's just energy, just straight energy. They want to see the
right,
crowd on their feet
right,
for the entire 50 minutes they're performing. And if they're not on their feet, how do we get them on their feet? How
right,
do we get that hype? You know what I mean? So
right. It's funny. And as we wrap up, I don't see any more questions coming in. So, well, there is a question. I think we sort of covered it before. Um, that says, for example, Sumfest, is it a challenge in lighting when morning comes?
no, it isn't, because what you're doing now is you just don't spit in God's face. So when lighting comes up, what we do is we do a slow transition from my lights to sunlight. So as the sun is rising, and
Right,
I look at where it is. So if it's coming up behind the stage, and I know, say, okay, fine, I can just keep my front light on,
right,
keep the palette mute because there's nothing for me to see now.
right,
As the sun rises and I can get more key light on the stage, and I start bringing down my lights little by little, so, and let the sunlight take over, because at that point there's nothing, I can't fight it. It is the biggest ball of light in the sky,
right.
you
I
know.
know.
So
Like,
you just
yeah,
slowly ease back on the throttle and say, okay, it's all you, God, take over now. And literally sometimes we've actually turned off everything
yeah,
and gone, and they're still performing because there's no reason for us to have lights on at that time.
yeah. At that time, you just kind of leave the audio guys to finish off the show.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
All right, I'm starting to wrap up. Listen, John, thank you so much for doing this. We may have to do a part two because we didn't even get to JoJo Siwa. We were supposed to talk about JoJo today, because you were telling me some stuff about her that's like really incredible. That just piqued my interest a lot. Now I want to go work for a children's artist, um, so I can be done at 9 o'clock at night.
Oh
But
yeah.
but thank you so much for doing it. I want to say to everybody who's watching, um, if you haven't already done so, please subscribe to the YouTube channel, share it with everybody. We're trying to bring as much value to people in this time. If you're looking for greater learning, if you're an audio professional and you want a little bit more direction on learning, we have our Patreon site, patreon.com/, Jason Reynolds Pro Audio. And then go to jasonreynoldsproaudio.com and opt in with your email so I can stay in touch with you. But I'm gonna close with this. Um, you know why God said, "Let there be light"?
No, tell me.
Because audio was already working.
So he saved the best for last. That's what
That
you're saying,
joke.
right? Okay,
Whatever.
got you.
All right, man.
It
Thank you
was
so
great.
much,
Thanks for
bro.
having me.